Well, I want to say hello to everybody in the ministry and teaching and preaching class. This has been a wonderful class for me. It's come at a very unique time for me, just with all that is going on and some of my responsibilities. And so it has been a challenge to stay on top of the class, but I want to say I have really enjoyed all of the content of the course from the beginning all the way to the end. And it's certainly been a help to me in preparing and communicating messages from the Bible. I think the part of the class that has just stood out to me and has kind of been weaved throughout the class is just the focus and emphasis on expository preaching. I was trained in homiletics class in my undergraduate degree, and there was a focus and an emphasis on expository preaching. I don't know, though, that I've ever um, thought about expository preaching as much or as in the way that we have over these last several weeks. And I appreciate the author of our of the book that we've read through, and his continual emphasis on allowing the text to shape your sermon rather than your sermon to be impressed upon the text. I think it is easy in preaching to have a formula, what he calls a formula, or some kind of plan that you develop a sermon from a text and don't allow the text or the different genre to really dictate what you are going to preach, and then the shape of that text. And that's certainly been a huge help to me in thinking through different types of texts, whether that be the Psalms or the Proverbs or parables, for instance. And then also just the emphasis on the macro level of looking at Scripture. I know that, and I've been taught that. But again, just to go back, and because I think the reality is it does take more work. It takes more labor to not just defer to what the simple meaning of a text is. Typically, there is a simple application. Typically, there is something surface level that you can grab quickly and use, but it forces you to go a little deeper and work a little harder, which means that you get the true meaning of the text and the true application. And as he said in the very beginning of the course, we are not here so much to preach sermons, but to preach texts. And we want to do the text justice. And so the classes certainly helped me, I think, grow in that area and become better and more focused on that. As far as the parable project, I chose the parable of the Good Samaritan. I don't know why specifically I chose that. Just when reading through the list, I thought I would enjoy studying and preparing a sermon from that parable. I think obviously that is a very familiar parable. Most everybody could, tell the story of the Good Samaritan without even looking at the parable. But I think for me, the thing that has really stood out to me in looking at it this time and studying for the parable project in that parable is just how that Jesus really was sending a message to the lawyer in the parable, also to those that were listening and standing by, that really everybody is our neighbor. That was the question that the lawyer asked at the beginning of the parables: who is my neighbor? Thinking, what group counts as my neighbor? And Jesus goes on to tell the story about the thieves and the priest and the Levite and what kind of neighbors they were. And then he finishes with an unlikely hero in the story, who is the Samaritan, who he would have hated, who he would have not even wanted to speak the name of a Samaritan. And then in Jesus' story, the Samaritan is the one who really loved his neighbor as himself. And the lawyer at the end had to admit that it was the Samaritan that was the good neighbor. And then Jesus told the lawyer to go and do that likewise, like the Samaritan had done. And I think it just impressed upon me that all of us encounter people in our lives that are different than we are, that have different backgrounds, maybe different political views, maybe different views on life, maybe different views on sexuality, and people that are different than us. My tendency is to want to help people who are like me, and want to help people who think like me, and want to get behind those kind of causes, and my natural tendency is to be more compassionate to people who are more like me. And the parable, I think, for me, really helped me to just be reminded that we're to be neighbors to everybody. Be reminded that we are to show compassion toward everybody, whether we like them, whether we don't like them, whether they're like us or whether they're not like us. And they can really be, as in the scripture, the complete antithesis to what we are, but we're still called to have compassion toward them and to be a neighbor to them. And so I think the project and just reading it and putting together the material for it just has really helped me grow in that area. And so I have certainly enjoyed everything about the class. I wish I would have been able to keep up with it a little better, but I have enjoyed it, and it's been a great help to me, and I know it'll be fruitful for me in my ministry. Thank you, and I hope each of you have a wonderful and a blessed day.